George V Hospital in Camperdown.
And what year was that?
1949.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up at number 89 Station Street Newtown.
What sort of a house was that?
Just one of those single-storey terraces, 12-foot frontage.
Mm. And did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, one sister, Marion, and she's 2 years younger than me.
And that's it?
Mm. Small family for those days.
Yeah. Well, what kind of a kid were you?
I'd say I was a fairly shy sort of kid, probably.
No, don't worry.
Oh, good.
Okay, what kind of a kid were you?
I'd say I was fairly shy, but I was pretty bright. I always seemed to sort of come near the top of the class. And I was bored a lot of the time.
Why?
There wasn't a lot to do in Station Street Newtown in the 1950s. There weren't, not many cars came past.
Well, what about shops and things like that?
There were plenty of shops in King Street Newtown. Yeah, there were little shops.
But that wouldn't be much interest to a kid, would it?
No. I can remember a few of the shops fairly distinctly. Like there was a dairy shop or a cheese shop, and that was really nice because for some reason it had sawdust on the floor, and they'd give you samples of all the different types of cheeses. So I loved that.
Who ran that?
I don't remember the person's name.
But were they Australian or were they immigrant?
Yep, they were Australians. I don't remember many immigrants at all in the early 50s around Newtown. They were pretty rare. I remember there was a Dutch kid, and I remember I had a fight with him one day, and it was something to do with him being Dutch, I'm sure. And I swore at him, and then he called me a bloody basket. I remember that, and he threw a brick at me, and it hit me on the head, split my head open, and I ran home with blood all pouring out of my head. So that was the sort of the migrant influence there.
Well, I thought with the different sorts of cheeses that Australia was pretty boring until we had the influence of the European.
Oh, they were all Aussie cheeses. You'd have maybe a few varieties of tasty and a couple of matured cheeses, but there was some variety,
Yeah. What sort of a family do you come from?
Working class family. My father worked. His first jobs were in the aircraft industry. He was a fitter, an aircraft fitter out at Kingsford-Smith Airport, and he worked for, I remember, Butler Airlines, and which later became Ansett, and then he got a job at Email, or in those days it was called Sydney Cook. So he was a fitter in a factory making nails and wire and stuff, and that was at Alexandria.
What about your mum? Did she work?
She was a bookbinder by trade. She came out from Glasgow at the age of 19, and she'd learnt bookbinding. She'd done a bit of it before she came out here, and she continued to do it for a while. I remember she worked in a bookbinding place in Newtown, but she didn't do it for very long for some reason, or it might have been sort of on and off. And the only other jobs I can remember her doing were she used to occasionally bring home some factory work, and us kids used to help her. It was like, for example, there were these eyelet things, and you had to make them or assemble them. Little factory jobs where you'd have hundreds and hundreds, it was piecework, and there'd be thousands of little things that you had to, metal things that you had to.
Did you have to put them onto paper cards for them to go into the shops?
That could have been one thing. Yeah, there were lots of different little jobs like that. I remember she brought home, and the only other job I can remember her doing was cleaning. She used to occasionally go and clean in some ritzy houses.
Where?
Around the place. Locally, Newtown. I remember her one house she cleaned was in Stanmore.
Some of those bigger houses.
Yeah,
there.
some of the bigger houses.
What sort of a man was your father?
I suppose the most for a kid anyway, the most striking thing was that he was a long distance runner. He was very athletic, you know. He was actually New South Wales champion over distances like 10 miles, 15 miles, and he used to train every Saturday out at Centennial Park, and that was great fun because he'd take us kids out there. And so we'd just spend all of Saturday ranging around Centennial Park. And what else? He was otherwise fairly quiet sort of guy. That was his hobby, running.
Did he compete?
Oh yeah. As I say, he was New South Wales champion. You know, he belonged to South Sydney Athletics Club for many, many years, you know. And so they would train, if they weren't training at Centennial Park, they'd be training around Bateau Bay and places like that. He actually carried the Olympic torch in 1956 in Melbourne. And what else? He competed in the, it was called the Empire Games in those days. That was before my time, but you know, I saw photographs and medals and things. He competed in Perth in the Empire Games.
Yeah.
So he was a pretty top runner, in his day.
And when he carried the Olympic torch, where was that? Like, is that when they...
It was on the way. It was somewhere between, I think they carried it from Sydney to Melbourne. Yeah, and he was one of the hundreds of runners, you know, that carried it. But I mean, that was a great thrill for me, so I was very impressed that Dad was such a great runner. And I never was. You know, as much as he encouraged me to have a go, I'd run half a mile out at Centennial Park around a lake and I'd just collapse, you know, and paddle in the water or catch frogs or something. It wasn't my thing, you know. I tried high jumping and a few other athletics things, but no, I was more of a bookish sort of kid, you know, more interested in academic things and stuff like that. And that was fine with him, you know. He was very easygoing, so he just encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do.
Were there a lot of people involved in athletics and things like that? Then I find that, I guess people must have been, because we were competing in the...
I mean,
you don't hear about it though.
The South Sydney Athletics Club was a big club, and you know, we'd go out there every Saturday afternoon, and there was a sort of, still is, there's a rotunda sort of between two lakes, and all the families would congregate there, you know, and there'd be sandwiches and barbecues and tea, and it was a real family thing. And
your mum would go too?
No. Rarely. I can remember her going occasionally. I think that was Dad's thing somehow. And also she wasn't that interested. I mean, because, well, for her, it would have meant quite a few hours doing nothing much, apart from maybe chatting to other women. And she didn't come out. So that was the thing that we did.
And both of your kids would go?
With Dad. I went nearly all the time, and my sister came most of the time. Occasionally I'd come with other mates, you know, and we'd sort of range around the sandhills and things. It was a bit wilder in those days. Centennial Park, oh yeah.
And what do you mean by that?
It wasn't so... there were areas that were more bushy, you know, and you could really you could get lost. It's hard to imagine now, but we really felt we could get lost out there sometimes.
Was it a safe place?
Yes and no. I mean, nothing ever happened to me, but there were some strange people would kind of be lurking behind bushes and, you know, in toilets, and things would go on. Yeah, we sort of saw a few things out there.
Like what?
You know, couples making love in the grass, or people swimming in the lakes when they shouldn't have been, and, you know, fishing when they shouldn't have been.
Like the kids used to swim in
ducks.
the lakes.
We used to swim too in the lake, yeah. What else?
Catching ducks.
People would catch ducks.
Dinner.
Probably. We didn't. We caught goldfish. No, not goldfish, carp and tadpoles and frogs.
Well, how would you describe your mother? What sort of a woman was she?
Mum was pretty quite sort of a bit antisocial, I'd say. And I don't know whether that had to do with the fact that she'd come out from Scotland at the age of 19 without any friends. I think I'd probably put it down to that, basically. And she never lost her strong Scots accent. over many years. She didn't have many friends. We had very few visitors in the house. You know, there were a couple of neighbours that she'd talk to and spend time with, you know, in Station Street, but never more than a few doors away. She didn't go out much.
And what brought your family to live in Newtown? How come your father settled there?
I don't know for sure. He was brought up in the inner city, in Darlinghurst and Crown Street and Palmer Street, areas like that, Surrey Hills. So I guess he was an inner city boy. So I guess to him it was familiar country, and being close to the airport, well, not too far. He always had a car, and being you know, close to Alexandria where he was in the factory, I guess it was sort of convenient. Had lots of pubs, which suited him.
Really, being that athletic, you think that he wouldn't be able to drink that much?
Oh, that was a big thing. They all went to the pub after running on Saturday. Yeah.
They didn't put on weight.
They ran it off, you know. Because he'd go training nearly every afternoon, as well as Saturday. He'd go up to, say, St Paul's Oval in Sydney University and, you know, do 10 laps or something.
Oh, gee.
Just about every day.
With your family, who controlled the finances?
My mother.
Did your dad
Definitely.
have to hand over the pay packet?
He handed over the pay packet, and he'd get so much, you know, for the week or whatever, and Mum would look after the finances.
Pay the rent and... Did you own your own house or were you renting?
We rented for a long time, because I remember going up to pay the rent at a place called Starboket. Although that, come to think of it, that's a building society, wasn't it, Starboket? So it could have been the mortgage repayments. I remember going there, you know, if it wasn't every weekend, every second Saturday, and paying this money. Now, whether it was rent or... I mean, Mum and Dad eventually did own that house in Newtown, you know, and they sold it and bought a house in Marrickville when I was about 10 or 11. So, yeah, they did eventually own it.
What, were your parents religious?
Not really at all, no. But the funny thing is, Mum encouraged us kids to go to Sunday school and then church. They never went, my parents, but they encouraged us to.
But Scottish, but are you Catholic?
No.
Very Catholic name.
Very Catholic name. Well, my father's mother was an Irish Catholic, even though Dad was born here and brought up here. So that's where the name comes from.
And what would your mother have been, Presbyterian or something like that?
Yeah. In fact, I think I've still got her Presbyterian Bible that she brought out from Scotland.
And where did you go to Sunday school?
The only one I can remember going to was was Church of England, Stanmore. So that must have been a bit later. That must have been when we moved to Marrickville. I can't remember going to church in fact I can't remember where the church was in Newtown. There must have been plenty of them, but no, it was a bit later.
Were they politically active?
Not really, no. My father was always a fairly strong unionist, because he was in the Metalworkers Union, and I can remember, you know, strikes and talk of strikes, and I remember him, you know, he would often say, oh, you know, we had a union meeting today and they talked about this and that. So, but other than that, no. I mean, he always voted Labor. Yeah.
And can you remember any of the issues that they went on strike over and how he felt about them?
I can only ever remember it being about wages.
Not so much conditions.
Wage rises, no. No, in fact, no. Conditions were pretty bad. I mean, he took me to the what was it called? Anyway, the metal factory in Alexandria, Sydney Cook, and I was just appalled at the sort of working conditions. You know, incredible noise, and of course it was impossible to talk. Absolutely impossible. There were huge metal presses going, you know, hell for leather. making this incredible din. My father got industrial deafness out of it. I mean, his hearing, he's 83 today, but his hearing is certainly impaired. They never wore, hearing plugs or anything in those days. There was no. You just put up with noise, and the heat was incredible, and the dirt.
Did you remember hearing about industrial accidents there? Your dad coming home and talking about people injured?
No, I don't.
Uh-huh.
I know there were a lot of industrial accidents, but I think I know that from reading about it later on.
Yeah.
But at the time, I don't remember, no.
Hmm.
No.
Did your dad ever talk about Menzies or any of the politicians of the day? Menzies was doing his Reds under the bed thing.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah. I don't remember him talking about Menzies. No.
What about the split in the ALP, the DLP ALP big bust up?
I mean, I remember that, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know whether I sort of remember it in hindsight, if you know what I mean. Reading about it later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember Dad talking about the politicians. I don't think he liked Menzies. I mean, he was a Labor man, you know.
Yeah.
He always voted Labor, so. But he always read the Telegraph.
You didn't get papers like the Workers' Daily or Tribune or.
No, I don't remember him ever reading Tribune. No, he'd read the Union paper, which was, the Metalworkers' Union paper was fairly left wing and fairly very unionist and very pro-Labor. Yeah.
Okay. What sort of discipline was used in the house?
Mainly getting yelled at by Mum. She was the main disciplinarian. But if ever things got really out of hand, it was the strap, and that was Dad. Dad's job was the strap.
And what was the strap exactly? Was it a belt or from?
It was a wide leather belt.
Like they used to use in barbers, one of those wide. Or
I don't remember it being that heavy. No, more like a. Don't know. Maybe. Was it leather?
Or off a machine. You know how they used to have leather belts sometimes.
Yeah. It was leather, but I can't remember how heavy it was. But I remember it being wide.
And what would you, when you say if things got really out of control, what would you have to do to get that?
Well, one occasion when I did get the strap was when I was a real firebug, you see, and there was an old lady who lived close by called Mrs. Gillette, and she lived in this little lane just off Station Street. And unfortunately for her, the side of her house had these ventilators, and one of them was broken. And so, of course, one day when I think I was only about 5 or 6, I stuffed the ventilator full of newspaper and lit it.
Was it weatherboard?
No, I think it was a brick house, but of course it got full of smoke.
She could have died.
And all I remember after that was I just got the biggest belting of my life, and I don't think I lit any more fires. I still remained a firebug, but I didn't sort of set fire to people's houses after that.
And what would your mum yell at you about?
Oh, usually minor things like, not finishing dinner or not eating your peas or, leaving a mess in your bedroom, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And your sister, did she...
Or not feeding the dog or stuff like that.
And was your sister disciplined in the same way?
Yeah, mainly yelling. I don't think she ever got the strap, come to mention it. That was very rare, that was like the really worst punishment. I think that was, mainly for me.
Were you expected to contribute toward the family, financially or as you got older?
Oh, well, what, like getting a job and so on?
Well, yeah,
working?
well, in the Depression, kids often had to do anything they could, but I mean, even selling newspapers and bottles and scrap iron and all sorts of things. But I mean, I assume that in the 50s it would be different, but was it? Did you have to, or did you just have to have jobs? Like you would mow the lawn or something like that?
things around the house. Yeah, I don't remember ever. I think I did one paper run, but I can't remember how old I was. I might have been about 12 by then. So we would have moved to Marrickville by then. Yeah.
And when you did the paper run, though, would the money go to the family or would it go to you then? From what I can remember, I always got whatever I earned. Yeah, because after that, my first real job was doing a sort of chemist run. Was riding a bike around delivering, medicines to old people around Enmore and Newtown and Enmore. But I must have been old enough to ride a bike around, so I must have been about 14 by then. Were you, was the family, so you must have been, well, you'd have a lot more affluence. In the Depression, people needed the money from the kids, literally to buy food, and it was crucial to their survival, but in the 50s hopefully things were a bit better. Do you remember what your standard of, when you look back, what do you think about your standard of living?
Well, yeah, we had all the basics, but not many frills.
What sort of car did your parents have?
The only two I can remember were, we had a T-model Ford, and we had a Whippet, which had a dicky seat, one of those seats that fold out in the back.
Really?
At the back, yeah, an open air seat that folds out. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
That
great.
must have been quite old.
Oh, that was old, yeah, that was, I think the Whippet would have been like a late 30s car, so it was already pretty old, yeah, by the 50s. And T-model Ford, I can't remember when they came out.
No, they weren't 50s anyway.
No, so they were already, yeah, my father was very interested in cars, so he would have, bought a second-hand car and, done it up and worked on it, yeah. I don't remember getting a new car, although, well, let's see, we got a Holden, we had a Holden, yeah, I'm sure he bought a new Holden, but that was, I'd say I would have been maybe 15 or 16 by then, but till then, it was second-hand cars, definitely, yeah. And I mean, we didn't get a television till I was about 10 years old, so what does that make it? 56. So
59.
About 66. Because TV came out in 56, I remember that, because we used to go and watch TV down the road at a friend's place, but yeah, we didn't get it till I was about 10.
So you would have been in 59, you were born in 49?
Sorry, you're right. What am I saying? 59, yeah.
Yeah. And when
First TV, yeah.
Can you remember TV actually first coming out? What did you used to go and watch it in shop windows? Or
Yeah, a little bit, but mainly we went up to Dawn Keeler's, the funeral. She was the daughter of John Keeler, the funeral business, and they're still in Newtown. And they were the first people to get a television. And fortunately, we were friends, and so we got to watch television from the very start.
And what were the shows that you liked then?
The earliest ones I can remember were, there was the Mickey Mouse Club, and that was one of the very first shows, and what was it called, that Johnny O'Keefe show?
Around the Clock, Rock Around the Clock?
Rock Around the Clock was an early one. They're about the only two I can recall, actually.
When you think of music at that time, can you remember your parents' reaction to rock and roll? And people like Johnny O'Keefe? And Elvis and, Buddy Holly, I suppose. Can you remember if there was that much influence from Elvis and Buddy Holly out here? Or?
Oh yeah, they were really big.
Can you remember your parents, what they thought of that music?
Well, they never bought it. They never bought those records, because I can remember the sort of records we had around the house, and they were Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, and who else was there? Anyway, an older vintage. Certainly not Buddy Holly or Elvis Presley. No, my parents never bought those records, so they might have heard it on the radio, but it wasn't their thing.
Did you listen to the radio much?
Yeah,
a lot. That was our main form of entertainment. I'd say.
At night?
Mm.
And what were the shows you listened to?
What was there? I remember listening to Tarzan. There was an Australian comedy show that was really... Yes What, I think it was called. Yes What. It was set in a classroom. Yeah, and there was a Green Bottle and kids with funny names. It was really, really funny.
Can you remember a show with a character called Dexter in it?
Yeah,
What was that?
Dexter.
It was American, I think.
Was it?
I don't know. It had a very strong, harsh kind of voice. That's why I'm assuming it was American.
Dexter.
No.
Gee, that...
No.
Rings a bell, but I can't...
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the show.
So what would you do in the evenings after you'd had the evening... You'd have the evening meal, would you?
Pretty early, usually.
Was that called tea or dinner?
Tea.
Had tea at what?
Tea at 5:30, 6 o'clock, depending on the season. You know, I mean, in winter you'd eat earlier. Summer maybe an hour later, but never later than, I would say, never later than 6:30.
And what would be a typical evening meal then?
Always meat of some description, usually chops or sausages, except fish on Friday, always fish on Friday, which we'd often go and buy, not cook. In fact, I don't think Mum ever cooked fish. That was something you went and bought.
It battered.
Oh yeah, in the fish and chip shop. Otherwise it was just meat and peas or beans and, you know, carrots maybe, mashed potato, pretty basic stuff.
Did you ever eat out? Family go to a restaurant?
No.
Did
Can't
you
remember ever doing that.
ever have takeaways of exotic foods?
It didn't exist.
What about Chinese? Was there any even Chinese food?
Oh, there was China, yeah. There was at least one Chinese cafe. I can't remember going to one, but we probably did. We probably did.
But you don't remember having it as takeaway, or was usually your mother cooked the meal?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. It was very unusual to buy, except the fish and chips was regular. You know, that was regular Friday night thing.
Yeah, I don't think there was the culture of eating out.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, what did your family do for fun? I mean, we've talked about your dad and everything going to Centennial Park. Was there anything else the family did together?
Going for a drive was the big thing.
Where did you go to?
We'd go to places like Kurnell.
What was out at Kurnell?
Not much.
Was there a beach? Isn't that industrial? I keep thinking of the oil refinery when I hit the Kurnell.
Oh, it is, but there's... it's on Botany Bay, so there's a bit called Silver Beach, which is quite nice.
Not polluted?
In those days, I'm trying to think what industry there was. So there wouldn't have been as much industry then, in the early 50s. No, I can't remember when the oil refinery went in, for example. So that's Kurnell. Royal National Park, we go there. Audley, you know. Where else? A place called Carr's Park, which is in the Kogarah municipality, which is again on... Oh, it's on the Georges River, yeah. East Hills? Somewhere out in the Georges River, I think it was East Hills. Picnic Point, that's the place. That seemed to take ages to get to because, you know, you didn't have the bridges that we have now, so you had to sort of go via Liverpool or something to get to Picnic Point.
And would you swim there?
Oh yeah. Whenever we got a chance, we'd swim.
And would you take a picnic or something?
Yep.
What about holidays? Did your family go on holidays?
Yeah, we used to go. I think probably every summer we'd go. I'd say once a year we'd have a...
To where?
We'd have a holiday. I remember going to places like Pretty Beach, Killcare, Bateau Bay, all those places up near the entrance. They're the only places I remember.
And where would you stay there, like caravan parks? Or?
No, we'd always rent a cottage. Yeah, you know, fibro place usually.
Did your parents like their work?
I got the impression that Dad had enjoyed being an aircraft fitter, and he certainly always kept up his interest in aircraft and the airport. In fact, sometimes, well, that was one of the drives we used to do. Sometimes we would just drive out to the airport and watch the planes landing and taking off over Botany Bay. I used to enjoy that.
Yeah.
So did he. You know, and he would know all the planes, and he'd say, "Oh, that's a 1949 something or other, you know, DC-3," and I was quite interested in all that. And he took me at the airport a couple of times, and he took me on this dreadful flight on a DC-3 from Sydney to Forster, and it was a terrible flight. It was really noisy and, you know, bumpy, and I think I got sick, and it seemed to take forever, and I wasn't all that thrilled with air travel, you know.
Was it just a joy flight sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, because he worked at the airport, he got, you know, a cheap ticket or a free ticket or something.
Did you stay overnight there or something, or just come back?
I don't remember. We might have just come back. Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think he enjoyed his work in the middle. I might sort of say a few things.
Yes.
This poem's called Newtown Boy. Sitting on the gas box, waiting for me dad. He's at the pub. Fridays he celebrates and puts on a funny voice. Joy Pithers across the street. She's in kindergarten too. I'll bet her dad is home. Never seen him but. Dawn Miller's father, the funeral man, he's rich. They're going to get a television soon as they switch it on from America. First thing will be Mickey Mouse. I'll be 7 then. Joy Pithers kissed me sitting on the gas box. But I love Christine Parker because she's got long brown hair down to her bottom. When she sits on the scripture mat, I make plats for her and look at her red ribbons. On Fridays, Dad gets drunk and wobbles his bike down the side. But he always brings us fish and scallops, fruit tingles, steam rollers, choo-choo bars and cherry ripes. I fight my sister for the green fruit tingles. Other days, Dad puts me on his handlebars. He made a seat for me and rides me up to the very end of the street, across the big road, and we watch the trains go past. I wave to the guards and they wave back. Sitting on the gas box, I can see into Salmon Park, where the Dutch boy who called me a bloody basket threw half a brick and split my head open. I didn't have to go to hospital, but I shouldn't have called him Dago. The street light just came on. Now those big flying ants will bump against the globe until they're fried. Yesterday my tortoise died after Mr. Morris ran over it in his semi-trailer. Here's my last green one. I've been saving it for a week, fizzing in my mouth, tickling under my tongue. I wish a car would come past. Hey, I can smell fish and scallops. I'm standing on the gas box, waving. It's my dad and the old green bike.
That's great. It's a good poem.
Thank you, yeah. Yeah, it was published in the school magazine. I think kids would have got a bit of sort of an impression of maybe how life was different then.
Oh, yeah. I think it's great. We'll have to use it, yeah. Well, who were your friends? You mentioned a few of your friends in that poem.
Yeah.
Was it the real names?
Yeah, Christine Parker, Joy Pithers. Should be Dawn Keeler. It was actually Keeler's funeral business. I don't know why I changed it. Who are my other friends? Freddie Hartup was a great friend of mine. He lived just round in the back street. And we just spent a lot of time playing in the backyard. That's all I can remember.
What sort of games did kids
endless
play
hours
then?
playing in the backyard. Well, I had this wind-up train set, for example, you know, and we'd set up the tracks in the backyard, and so you could have little hills, and you could have it going through water, and you know, you'd sort of make up the whole sort of city
railway system in the backyard.
Mm.
That's one thing we did. And what else? I suppose being boys, a lot of our games revolved around toy cars and little, wind-up motors and things.
Mm.
And I had Meccano set. That was a big thing. My father made me, well, he sort of built me gradually over the years. He built up a huge Meccano set, which was in this big box. And so, and sometimes he would help me, make things. So you could make structures out, buildings and cars and things.
Did everybody have Meccano then? It was a bit like the 50s Lego.
It was like Lego, yeah.
Yeah.
It was very popular. What else? Oh, cricket, and cricket was the big game, more than football or anything like that.
Where would you play cricket?
In the back street, behind Station Street. I can't remember what it was called now.
Mm.
Yeah.
And with your friends, you said you mostly played in the backyard. I mean, did you have much freedom to roam?
Yeah, we did, up to a point, but we never went very far. I don't remember ever going much beyond Station Street and King Street, and the back street. I mean, that seemed, in those days, seemed a big area. And the little park I mentioned in the poem, Salmon Park, which is directly opposite 89 Station Street, seemed to me in those days quite a big park, but now looking at it, it's just a pocket handkerchief size. It's tiny,
Mm.
So when, at that age, things seemed big, and Station Street seemed to me a very, very long street in those days. It's not actually, but it seemed to go on forever.
Were there a lot of kids in the neighbourhood?
Yeah, there were a lot. There was a big family on one side called the Murphys, and there were about 7 kids.
Were they over in Erskineville? No. It's the wrong generation, sorry.
I don't, yeah.
Over
They were
the
next
line.
door.
Oh, right.
Next door, yeah.
Mm.
And on the other side there was Mr. and Mrs. Portis and their daughter, Greta. So they were the immediate neighbours. Yeah, there were a lot of kids, because I remember a lot of the local kids, a lot of kids in Station Street went to the same school as me.
Mm. What school was that?
That was Newtown Public, which is up in King Street, near the station.
What was that like? How were you treated there?
It was a fairly sort of dark, foreboding building. I never liked the building much. It was sort of, dark brick and big rooms, not very light. I can remember we used to have open fires in the classrooms. When it got really cold, you'd light a fire.
Mm. And what was the average size of the family there? You said the Murphys had 7.
7, yeah, that was unusual. I mean, yeah, the average family was, I'd say it was 2 or 3 kids.
Mm.
It was pretty average by then.
Mm. And where did most kids' parents work?
My impression was that most of them were factory workers.
Mm.
Mm. There were factories in St. Peter's, Alexandria. Newtown, not so much. So I think Newtown was more sort of shops and very small industry. But the bigger industries were, sort of between Newtown and the airport.
Right.
There's a lot of heavy industry.
Now, if you didn't roam, I mean, did you have any adventures, like doing things with your friends, roam, when you perhaps you shouldn't have been, or?
The greatest adventure I can remember is, and I was a little bit older by then, was going in the stormwater drains under the factories, down towards Sydenham. Yeah, I can remember that distinctly. You'd sort of, there were, a lot of them still exist, there are these open stormwater channels, and if you followed them, they would go under the whole factory system.
Gee.
It was pretty dangerous, actually.
And scary.
Yeah, well, that's what we liked about it, I guess.
Yeah.
And dirty and slimy and slippery, and there were rats and stuff like that. So, I don't think my parents would have been too happy about us roaming around there, but we did.
Mm. Any other places? Anything else?
I remember fishing on the Cooks River at Tempe. I'm wondering how we got there. We would have got it. Yeah, that was easy because you just get a bus from King Street Newtown to Tempe Depot, which is not far, and you were at the Cooks River. So it was a good place to fish.
Was it clean then?
No, not very. You'd be lucky to catch a few leatherjacket, you know.
Yeah. Did you eat them?
I don't think we ever caught anything big enough to eat.
Probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Did you have any books?
I can't remember. Our house was pretty empty of books. My parents didn't read. Newspapers, that was about it. Newspapers and magazines, you know.
And what were the...
Post and Pix, things like that.
You said the Telegraph before.
Telegraph and the Mirror.
They would have been quite popular.
Oh, every day, yeah. I mean, Dad would get the newspaper every day, every morning and every afternoon, and get the paper. But books, no. There was maybe the odd little Reader's Digest thing, and that was about it. Yeah.
What about sex education?
Very, very rare. I don't remember any at school. Not as a little kid, you know. In high school, yeah, but you're talking about...
Well, whenever.
Whenever.
Yeah.
In high school there was a bit, because I can remember father and son evenings. That was at Fort Street.
Yeah? Did you go to Fort Street?
Yeah.
Gee, so you must have done very well in primary school.
Yeah, I went to Stanmore Primary. See, we moved to Marrickville, so I then went to Stanmore Primary, and I did quite well there, and then went to Opportunity class in 5th and 6th class. So that was at Summer Hill. So I had to get the train to Summer Hill, and from there went to Fort Street. And they had these father and son evenings.
How did you feel about
sex
that?
education. I was pretty embarrassed about it, really. Yeah.
And how did they feel about your success at school, given that they weren't particularly interested in education?
It's not that they weren't interested. I mean, they were very pleased that I did well, and they encouraged me, and they more or less left me to my own devices, basically. And, you know, they were very pleased when I got, you know, stars or good marks and all that, and good reports. But they weren't really able to help me with much at all. No.
When you're talking about the local area, before you mentioned that it was mostly residential and then shops up in King Street and on Station Street. Well, did most of the people shop locally there? Or?
Oh, yes. Yeah, King Street had just about everything you needed.
Right, so, because now King Street's sort of got lots of restaurants and art shops and things.
It didn't in those days.
And when people did their grocery shopping, did they do it like for the week, or was it like a daily thing?
I think Mum went shopping every day, basically, and that was part of her life, her lifestyle. You know, was to walk up to the local shops and get things. So no, I mean, she would bring back what she could carry.
Right.
You know, you wouldn't. You certainly wouldn't drive to go shopping.
And it wasn't a big expedition.
No, it was it was always just to the local shop where you'd be well known, and it would always be, you know, hello Mrs. Doyle, and you know, you would know the shopkeepers' names often. So it was more a sort of village atmosphere in that sense.
Did you notice any changes over the time you left when you were about 10 or 12?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We went to Marrickville.
Did you notice any changes, or it was pretty consistent over that time? The changes there come later.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember. I think I can remember Greek and Italian shops opening up that hadn't been there earlier.
Well, what sort of shops would they have been?
Like milk bars, fruit shops, you know, grocery sort of shops, and maybe the odd kind of Greek sort of cafe, restaurant type place, which we would never have gone to, of course, because that was for the Greeks, wasn't it? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Full of Greek men.
Oh, they would have had real coffee.
Yeah, and Greek men playing cards and talking, and you know, it was like a Greek place.
So there must have been some influx of immigrants then.
Well, I have vague memories, but I think it would have been late 50s, because I honestly can't remember many. Well, I didn't have any Greek or Italian mates, that's for sure. And
They weren't at school?
At school, I can't remember that. I can't remember Greek or Italian kids in Station Street, for example. I can only remember, it seemed a very Anglo neighbourhood. Yeah, in those days.
Well, what was the social focus of the area?
The pubs.
What about for the women? Or was it the women went to the pubs too?
Well, not really. My mother certainly never went. She wasn't a drinker, so she didn't drink at home or in the pubs. Now, women generally didn't go to the pub.
So was there a social focus? If there was, I don't know, just...
For women?
or anybody?
Well, for the men it was definitely the pubs. For the women it was home, you know, like visiting each other's home, and church, I suppose, for women who were in the church, who were involved with churches.
Well, a lot of women involved in church. Your mum wasn't,
I couldn't
was
say
she?
she wasn't, but I couldn't say I wasn't aware of a real sort of church-going culture. Put it that way.
Was it a safe neighbourhood?
Yeah, except that there were some gangs around.
What sort of gang?
There were gangs. Teenagers.
Bodgies?
Bodgies, I suppose, yeah. And the Murphy kids next door were pretty rough.
What was a bodgie?
Bodgies had... well, Johnny O'Keefe was a bit of a bodgie. You know, they had that sort of slicked hair, right, usually brushed back hairstyle. And what did they wear? They wore these sort of jerkin things, I think. Or maybe that was only Johnny O'Keefe. What did the bodgies wear? They wore jackets, leather jackets, I think.
Did they have pointy shoes?
Yeah, pointy shoes.
And I imagine them as having these stovepipe pants.
Yes.
Really tight. I kept thinking of the silver bodgie. You know. And what did they do?
The gangs or the bodgies?
The bodgies or the gangs?
The bodgies, yeah.
Were the gangs bodgies?
I don't think so.
And did the bodgies have widgies? Weren't the women called...
The bodgies and widgies, yeah. I might have been... I don't know whether I was too young to be really aware of it. I mean, I can't... And they rode motorbikes too.
Oh.
But I can't remember that being very aware of that. There was a sort of criminal element in maybe a petty criminal element in Newtown at the time, you know, and there was, for example, there was Ern McQuillan's gym, which was a boxing place, and that was on King Street, and you could go. My father took me there a couple of times for some reason, and you'd go upstairs, this really narrow, sort of smelly, you know, stairs, and there'd be these guys. There was a boxing ring up there, and there'd be guys training and boxing and punching and all that. And in my vague memories of all that, there was something a bit sus about it all. I had the feeling, could have been wrong, that there was a kind of criminal element around the joint, and that some of the kids I went to school with ended up getting into trouble with the police. But my memories are as vague as that. I can't, remember particular kids. No, I was vaguely, but basically I'd say a safe neighbourhood.
Were there many break and enters and things like that?
No. It was pretty safe.
Anyway,
you'd certainly leave your front door open, especially if it was hot.
when you were home.
Yeah, when you were home. Yeah.
If you went out, would you lock the place up?
Well, you'd close the front door. I can't remember how it locked, but you'd probably leave the back door unlocked in case someone forgot the key, sort of thing. You know, security wasn't a big issue.
Were there any drugs around? Addicts?
I don't remember. No.
Were there people that you were told
drugs.
to avoid?
Well, we were encouraged to avoid the Murphys next door because they were such a rough lot. I think it was 7 brothers. I think so. And they were noisy, and they'd punish each other in strange ways. Like I remember, sort of stick each other's head down the toilet and pull the chain, and horrible things like that. You know.
Oh gosh.
Yes. So we were encouraged to avoid them. And we did, you know.
And did you know any Widgies? Sorry.
No.
No. I wonder what they looked like. I wonder what the uniform was.
Don't know.
Okay. Were there any sort of local characters, you know, either eccentrics or colourful local racing identities, as the saying goes? You know, were there any people that stood out or stand out in your memory?
Not really. B. Miles, I remember, and I ran into her one day.
In Newtown?
And that's about it. Newtown or City Road or somewhere, you know, between Newtown and the city.
And what was your encounter with her?
Oh, she was getting in or out of a taxi or something, and I remember she had grotty old sand shoes on and looked a bit, you know, looked pretty grotty, and had lots of layers of clothing on. And I don't think I realised at the time who she was, and you know, later talking probably to my parents or someone, they said, "Oh, that's B. Miles." So they obviously knew who she was.
Everybody know who she was?
Yeah, I'd say yeah. I'm sure they did. She's the only local sort of really well-known character I can remember.
What were the main businesses in the area in Newtown?
I can't really remember. There were lots of pubs, if you consider that a business.
Did they have 6 o'clock closing then?
Yep.
What can you remember about that?
Oh, just that, you know, all the factory workers would sort of get up there as soon as possible, realising they had to get all their drinking done by 6.
And didn't they open again after, though? They shut for an hour or so and open again in the evening?
I don't remember that.
I think it was to force them to go home for dinner.
Ah.
Maybe your dad never got out again after, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Would he generally be home in the evening?
Yeah, oh yeah. I think he only Friday night was his drinking night,
Right.
and he'd usually come home, you know, a bit under the weather. But I suspect he probably, and they'd always go drinking after the running on Saturday, and I suspect he probably had a drink some other days after work.
But he'd generally be home after 6.
Oh, before that.
Oh, right.
Because they'd start work, like factory workers would start at 7 or 7:30 and work till maybe 3 o'clock or 3:30. So yeah, he'd generally be home well and truly by, say, 5 o'clock.
Oh, right. Yeah. If you're going to make major purchases, where would the family buy big items like white goods or stuff like that?
Oh, that would have been further up King Street, you know, heading towards the city, because there were lots of big places, big stores like Brennan's, I remember, was a big place, which was near the Elizabethan Theatre, the old Elizabethan Theatre.
Did you go to the theatre much, the family, or?
No. But I'll always remember going to the Elizabethan Theatre, because that was my introduction to the theatre, which was a show called The Tin Tookies, Yes, which was these huge puppets, string puppets, and we were taken there from school when I'm sure I wouldn't have been more than, 5 or 6 or 7, so it was probably kindergarten or first class, but I can distinctly remember these big, sort of grotesque, rather sort of ungainly puppets called the Tin Turkeys. And they did this sort of comedy show, and that was in the Elizabethan Theatre.
Mm.
And I was fascinated because it was the first live theatre that I'd seen.
Mm.
It was a puppet show.
Did you go to the movies and things like that on Saturday afternoons, or was that not an event?
No, we went to the pictures. We went to the Hub, Newtown, or the Odeon in Inmore Road.
Mm.
They were the two local cinemas.
Did you go
Picture shows.
Saturday or Sunday or something like that?
Saturday afternoon.
When you weren't running or something?
Well, that's right, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and sometimes we go Saturday night. Like if there's a big film, sort of family film, like, Ben-Hur or one of those big...
Ten Commandments?
Maybe, yeah.
Mm. I don't know.
The blockbusters, all
Yeah.
those, they'd be sort of Saturday night family entertainment, or a cowboy show, High Noon or something.
And your mum and dad would go
We'd
too?
be taken along, yeah, but not every Saturday.
Mm.
No.
Was it an expensive thing to do, to go to the movies?
Gee, I don't know. I remember it being something like $1, but what that meant in those days, it might have been, So you'd have $1 to get in and maybe threepence to spend, but I don't know whether that was a lot of money. I don't. It couldn't have been a lot of money because my parents wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Mm. What songs can you remember from the time?
Boy. Songs from those early days.
That were popular,
Popular songs. I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles. You know that one? I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. Some they fly so high, way up to the sky. Da-da-da-da-da. No? Don't know that one. Oh, gee.
Yeah.
Don't know why that came to me.
What about jokes and jokes and riddles and things that kids would do?
Oh, yeah, look, there were heaps.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a bad memory for jokes anyway, but yeah.
Well, what about tricks? Were there any tricks that you'd play on people?
We weren't very naughty kids. What sort of tricks were there? I can't remember. I mean, look, the naughtiest things we did would be things like throwing stones on an old lady's roof or something. Really, it was nothing nastier than that.
Yeah. What about rituals and things? You know how, till a few years ago we had Cracker Night, but there were also things like Wattle Day and Arbor Day and...
Empire Day.
Yeah. What would happen on those sort of occasions? How would they be celebrated?
Not much that I can remember.
Can you remember any flag raising ceremonies or... do you know what I'm saying? Rituals, patriotic kind of things. Was there any of that? Any sort
I
of
remember dancing around the maypole. But
really?
Oh yeah. At school, that was a school thing.
What would you do?
Maypoles,
yeah,
maypole,
yeah.
with the long ribbons, right? And the long coloured ribbons, and you'd run around holding these ribbons, and they'd get all twisted up, all the coloured ribbons, and then you'd run the other way to music, and unwind them all.
Was that part of...
So you'd sort of wind in and out. Do you know how it works?
No, I thought it was a medieval something or other.
No, I can remember doing that.
Yeah, and what was that part of PE or something?
What was it called? We had dancing like regularly. That sort of dance. Maypole. I think it was called maypole dancing. And Morris dancing and stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah.
No. They'd have bells on your knees or something, don't you, with most?
I don't know if we went as far as the bells, but we had that sort of line dancing thing, as kids. And I'm pretty sure that on Empire Day, you know, the old Commonwealth Day, there would have been something like that where parents would be invited to the school, and you know, there'd be God Save the Queen and dancing around the maypole, and maybe kids would read a poem or two, and there'd be some patriotic speech about, you know, how wonderful the empire was and stuff like that. Yeah.
Can you... 5th of May 1995. We were talking about jokes. Well, what were the big issues of the time when you were growing up?
You mean social issues?
Yeah, in the news.
I seem to remember there were a lot of strikes. Strikes and industrial problems, yeah.
And were your parents...
Like with the wharfies, for example, on the waterfront.
And can you remember your parents discussing the strikes and whose side they were on?
Well, my mother basically wasn't interested and hardly read the newspapers, actually. Dad would talk about, because I mean he'd read the newspapers every day, so he'd talk about what he was reading. And yeah, what was your question? Whether he talked about strikes?
Yeah, well, whose side were they on when all the industrial action was happening?
Well, Dad was basically on the side of the unions. Certainly his own union, which was the metal workers, which was, you know, very big and powerful.
Can you remember any big crimes that happened at that time that were big headlines?
No, I can't. You mean during the 50s? Yeah. No, I really can't. Big crimes.
Oh, you know how we were talking about rituals before? Can you remember any other sort of ritualistic things that happened, that people did? Well, what did you do on Cracker Night?
Oh, right. Oh, that sort of ritual. Yeah, well, well, Cracker Night was a big ritual. We'd have a huge bonfire in the back street. Yeah, not in a park or someone's backyard, but just in the middle of the street. You'd have huge piles of everything.
And all the kids in the neighbourhood would put it together, would they?
Oh yeah, and the fathers would help. Yeah, it would be a huge bonfire.
Where would you get all the stuff to put on it? Well, what would you put on it?
You'd sort of be collecting it from weeks ahead, before. You'd have sort of, fruit boxes and bits of timber and old fencing and whatever had been demolished, over the last 12 months, you'd burn on Cracker Night. Huge blazes.
Well, what was the most look forward to time of year?
Christmas. Yeah. Christmas first and then Cracker Night, I'd say, for kids.
And what would you do Christmas Day? What would that be like for you?
Oh, very traditional, We'd have a real Christmas tree, of course. And kids would wake up incredibly early, crack of dawn, of course, middle of summer, so you'd be up at, 4:30 or 5 as soon as it got light, yes. And opening your stockings, and the stockings would be full of little knickknacks. And then, we'd get pretty good presents, like, you might get a bike or a scooter or I don't know, I got an air rifle one year.
Where would you shoot it?
Oh, you'd shoot lizards in the backyard, so, or you'd put matchboxes on the fence and shoot matchboxes.
What smells can you remember? What did Newtown smell like in the 50s?
Smells. Well, I can remember smells at school were very, the smell of chalk. It's very. I mean, if I walk into a classroom, because a lot of classrooms don't use chalk anymore, but at that time, that was a very, very strong and evocative smell for me. Frangipanis. Yeah, that's a strong. There's still a lot of frangipani trees around. That's the one, isn't it, with the beautiful white? Yeah. That to me is a very sort of inner city Newtowny smell. Mm.
Was it more polluted then than it is now?
Well, not from cars, because there weren't many. But I'm sure there was some pretty heavy industrial pollution. Like there were, down at St Peter's, there were the brick pits, the brickworks, and I guess those big chimneys must have belched out quite a lot of smoke. So there would have been a lot of, and in winter, of course, people had coal fires, so that was fairly polluting.
Can you remember it being grey and smoggy looking, or can you remember blue skies?
Mainly blue skies, I would say. Yeah, in the early 50s anyway.
What sounds do you remember?
Gee, not a lot of sounds really. Birds, sparrows and pigeons basically, and starlings. The odd car coming down Station Street. We could hear the trains and the trams. You could hear them quite clearly because Station Street's only like one back from King Street. So you hear the trams going along there. They're the main ones.
What image comes to your mind when you think of that time?
You mean in general? Or
What sort of, if you think back, is there a sort of a picture of something that...
The trams going along King Street is a fairly strong image, and I mean, because, well, as kids, we had to cross that, like to get to school, so it was fairly dangerous. You had to be pretty careful about not being hit by a tram. And we used to put pennies on the tram track and flatten them out. So that's a fairly strong image.
What were common childhood illnesses at that time?
Well, there was polio was still a problem.
Did you know anybody who got it?
Yeah, I had one of the little kids in our street had polio.
Did they survive?
But he had to have a thing on his leg or both legs.
Calipers?
I don't know what they were called.
Metal things?
Yeah, metal rods. Their legs.
Did he get better or did he...
I don't remember, I just remember distinctly, a kid getting around with these things on his legs.
Can you remember people being afraid of that, or was it unlikely that you'd get it?
It was taken seriously. Yeah, it was... People would talk about, getting polio and, the poor kid with polio, and otherwise it was the usual common things, chicken pox and measles, mumps. Yeah, I don't remember any other, major illnesses.
Can you remember any deaths?
Yes, a little kid round in the back street, I think it was called Campbell Street, but I'm not sure, was hit by a semi-trailer. It was an awful accident because one of the blokes out in the back street was a semi-trailer driver, and he kept it parked in the street. And I can't remember how it happened, but a little kid somehow managed to get under the wheels of the semi and was killed. That's the only death I can remember that was close by.
remember any of the politicians of the day?
I remember Menzies, of course. He was like the main figure throughout the 50s. I can't even remember who was the Labor... I guess it was Evatt for some of the 50s. Menzies was the dominating figure, you know.
Can you remember the Queen visiting?
Mm-hmm.
What? Tell us about that.
That would have been... Was it 54 or 56? Maybe it was 54.
I think it was 4.
Okay, so I was about 5, yeah. Yeah, I can remember. We were taken out to the Domain area, you know, Lady Macquarie's chair, around there. And we all lined up and waved flags and, you know, she went past in some big car. That was about it.
Were you excited about her coming out?
Yeah. It was a big deal. Yeah, it was
What were the most exciting highlights of your childhood?
Well, that was one of them, actually. Like, the Queen's visit was really big. I mean, people talked about it for a long time before it happened, and it was like almost like someone coming from another planet, you know, because people didn't travel much in those days. I mean, okay, my mother came out from Scotland and other people had sort of emigrated earlier on, but she never went back, and people didn't generally go back to, you know, back to Britain if they'd come from Britain. So you didn't travel. So for someone to come out all that way from England to see us here in the colonies was, you know, was a big deal. And of course the whole kind of pomp and circumstance aspect of it was pretty impressive to a kid, you know, to have people wearing crowns and you know, lots of jewellery and horses and stuff like that.
You must have done... Did you talk about it at school beforehand?
Oh God, yes, it was a huge thing. The other big thing was the Olympics, 56 Olympics. You know, first Olympics in Australia, and my father was carrying the torch, and that was a big thing. And, well, there were big concerts in the stadium, but of course they were a bit later, I guess.
Concerts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Who?
the Beatles performed in Sydney Stadium.
Did you see them?
Yeah. Yeah. But that was...
Where's the stadium? What's that?
It was, you know, White City tennis courts?
Oh, yes.
It was down there.
Oh,
Somewhere.
right.
It's been demolished. It was Rushcutters Bay.
Mm-hmm. Oh gee, that must have been exciting.
Oh, it was incredibly exciting. I can't remember whether it was it 64 or... I mean, it was quite a bit later. You know. But there were concerts, like before, big concerts happened in the stadium. So Johnny O'Keefe, or... I don't know whether Buddy Holly ever came out, he might have. But there were big rock and roll concerts there.
And when did you start going to rock and roll concerts? What age?
The Beatles was the first, I think was the only big one. Yeah, otherwise it was on television. You know, you'd see the singers on TV.
Wait a minute, Can you remember any election campaigns?
Not from the 50s, no, I can't.
No. There was
Any other questions?
yeah, I'm running it. What did you know of the world outside your local area?
Not a lot.
Hmm?
You mean
Well,
like rest of Sydney? So
or even outside your neighbourhood, and then even say internationally. What were you aware of outside your area, Newtown? Or Station Street?
outside of Station Street, yeah. Not a lot. I mean, as I said, you know, we went down to as far as Sydenham via the stormwater channels and things, drains. But that was really like, you know, a really big expedition. And the only other places, we get the tram to to the beach sometimes, to Coogee Beach or Bronte Beach. So that was, yeah.
Was that with your father or with your family or with just your friends? With your friends?
Well, initially it would have been with the family, although we usually went by car. I can remember the other place we used to go a lot was Centennial Park. We'd drive there, So I was sort of a bit familiar with the beaches and the inner city. Hardly ever went to the North Shore, for example. And we wouldn't go, Picnic Point. So that's as far as we'd go, sort of west. But never travelled any further than that.
And were you aware of any big news events? I mean, what was going on? Well, there was the Korean War. I don't know when. That was somewhere that was the beginning of the 50s, wasn't it? Can you remember any? I don't know what happened in the world in the 1950s.
There was the Korean War, but it certainly doesn't stick out in my memory for any reason.
Well, getting back to more domestic life, what was your mother's working day like?
Pretty dull, I'd say, basically, because, she'd start by making kids breakfast.
What time would you get up?
6:30, somewhere between 6 and 7, probably depending on whether it was summer or winter.
Would she make your father breakfast for him?
For sure, yeah.
Would you sit down to breakfast, all of the family?
No, not usually, because Dad would. I'm pretty sure he started work at 7, so he'd be leaving home about 6:30, and no, we didn't have breakfast that early. No. So she'd make his breakfast, and then there'd be a second round.
And what would you have for breakfast?
We had cereal. I'm trying to think what sort. Probably, I think we had cornflakes and Wheat Bix, things like that, and then Vegemite on toast. Yeah. And on the weekend on a Sunday morning we might have poached eggs, or boiled eggs. And then she'd, depending on the day, she'd do the washing. But I think pretty sure she only washed once a week. And that would have been Monday. And because there's a big copper out in the laundry, and she'd have to heat the water for the copper and boil the sheets, because you boiled sheets in those days. You had to use boiling water for some reason. And that would take most of Monday, like washing would take most of Monday by the time you hung it out and then washed it, and then you had to rinse it and then wring it with a hand wringer and hang it out in a line and bring it in and fold it and iron it. It was like a big deal, washing day. Other days, what would she do? She'd go shopping, probably in the morning, I'd say, shopping, and knitting, talking to neighbours. She made us some clothes, I've remembered it, a bit of sewing, cleaning the house. That was about it. Talking to neighbours.
And then in the evenings, after you'd move forward talking about you have your evening meals and you listen to the radio, I mean, was there any... You mentioned before board games.
Play board games.
With
sometimes.
Your sister?
Mainly the kids, yeah. Things like Ludo, Snakes and Ladders, Monopoly. What else? There were lots of games came out like that.
Okay, what's your happiest memory?
So, probably the holidays, up at Pretty Beach, or Woy Woy was another place, because the house would be right near the beach, and it was just like total freedom, seemed to me. And you could just spend the day between swimming and fishing and paddling, and
eating and getting sunburnt, terribly sunburnt. I suppose they would have been probably the happiest times.
What's your saddest memory?
Newtown. Isn't that funny? I can't think of a really sad memory. Maybe when we were pretty close to the family, the Porter's family on one side, and when Mr. Porter died, that was pretty sad for some reason, but I can't remember quite why. I think it's just because we spent a lot of time with them and were sort of fairly close. But I was only little, so it didn't mean a lot to me. But I don't remember losing any close relatives, that sort of thing. No.
Okay. Is there anything you want to say? Anything I haven't asked?
Probably not. It's pretty complete there. No, nothing really. Some of the games we played, there were other games we played like hidings and chasings, and that was all around the neighbourhood. And cricket and football in the street. We always had scooters and bikes and, things with wheels on them. And playing in the park, we just spent endless hours playing in Salmon Park over the road, which had swings and trees and sort of things to climb on and tunnels to go through, and we just seemed to spend. It was a sort of fantasy, lots of fantasy games.
With the kids from the neighbourhood.
Yeah.
What about this friend of yours? His father was the funeral director. I mean, did you ever go and see his business?
No, I don't think we ever went to the funeral parlour. No, but it was always there was something a bit creepy about visiting the Keelers for that reason, There's something a bit strange about someone who was a funeral director. Yeah,
did they live above the shop or?
No, they didn't. Oh. They had a very nice house. He must have done quite well because they had a large house, not a 12-foot frontage like us. They had probably a 24-foot frontage and bigger house, and they got television as soon as it came to Australia and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, that's better.